Hi guys, welcome back to the Academy of Historical Fencing and the HEMA at Home series. So in the last video I looked through the Pringle Green defensive strategies, which was a simplified method using 3 guards that allows you to parry anything. And that's a really good method, but if you want to get into British military swordsmanship, you then want to develop more. Now I did mention that there are 9 guard positions in Roworth system, and I say Roworth because that's the manual I'm working from, because I love the Napoleonic period and I think Roworth's manual is fantastic, but it's in a long line of broadsword and sabre masters and instructors that ran certainly for about 150, 200 years or more, depending on how you evaluate it. But anyway, it's a long lineage, so there are other manuals to work from, and I did mention Thomas Mathieson, for example, as well as Pringle Green. But anyway, back to Roworth. 9 guard positions. We're going to go through them. I'm going to explain a little bit about how they're used and why, and then give you an exercise to work through that uses all of them, or all the good ones, which is what I'm going to get onto. So, in principle, what is a guard and how do we use them in this British military swordsmanship? Well, a guard position is what you stand in the fight. So if you're standing up against an opponent and you take a position with the sword, this will be a guard position. And this, for example, is the outside guard position, which you've already seen in previous videos. So a guard is how you stand in the fight, and it's also how you parry. Now, most of the guards are used for parries. Again, there is an exception to the rule, and that is the medium guard. And it's important to mention the medium guard because it doesn't protect and it doesn't cover any lines, and that makes it different in the system, and Roworth also doesn't like it, and that explains a lot about the approach to the fight. Now, the medium guard is right in the middle position, so divided down the middle, and it's called medium because it is in the middle. You could call it a middle guard, and it doesn't protect either lines, and I will talk about lines in a video coming very, very soon. But when you're in the middle, you're not guarding, you're not protecting, so people can strike either side of your blade at will, and you're not protected. So this is medium guard, and Roworth just says if you're going to use it at all, it's when you're uncertain of where your opponent's going to attack. It's not great, and that's an interesting one because a lot of styles do use a guard in the middle like this. So you see in a lot of rapier systems and some later sabre systems, and it has its part to play. But as far as Roworth is concerned, you should be covering the line of defense, and that means moving into a position that provides protection. So this doesn't provide protection anywhere except against, I suppose, a horizontal slash that comes straight at you like this, which is not exactly too likely. From here, you move into a position that covers. So this inside guard covers my left side, and my outside guard covers my right side. And that's the approach to the fight. And it's also worth mentioning that there are no guards that don't protect as a result, aside from medium, that he doesn't like. And the reason I mention that is that in some forms of swordsmanship, in fact a lot of them, there are guards that don't protect lines. Some examples, good examples, would be guards like this, for example, which you'll see in all sorts of medieval and early Renaissance treaties. And they don't provide protection, not in a defensive line anyway. They use the threat of strikes coming from high to basically use that threat to stop your opponent coming in rather than directly protect the line. Another example would be using low guards like this. So you'll see this in all kinds of earlier systems of swordsmanship, all kinds of low guard. Albert has all kinds of different names, and it's basically I'm not protecting myself, but I'm inviting you to attack. So that invite to attack is not in Roworth, bar again, there's always an exception to the rule. If you go to the tailor lessons, there is one invitation where the blade goes down, but you use it for a very, very specific reason. So the guard and the blade is at all times protecting us in one particular part of the body, and that's essential. So we don't move off into sort of, guards behind us, low guards down here, guards with the blade held high. We don't use any of that stuff, or resting on the shoulder, which you'll see, say, in Dussac, things like that. That's not in the system. Hilt and the fort, the strong part of the blade, is out front and protecting us at all times. So that's really important. Now on to the 9 guards. We'll start high. Guard of St. George is with the blade up in front of us. This is to protect against cuts 7 or potentially one or two if they come at quite a vertical angle towards the head. So cut 7 is vertical like this, not mentioned in Roworth because he just obviously considers it redundant because 1 and 2 kind of cover it. But a downward blow to the head we protect with Guard of St. George. Now, in later systems, you tend to just see hanging guards used for defending against this cut. And that's absolutely legitimate when you've got more hand protection. If you've got a bowl hilt or a basket hilt, you can get away with this parry against a head cut. When you've got a stirrup hilt, it really, really exposes the hand. So if you start using this parry a lot against downward blows coming to the head, there's a good chance if you make just the slightest slip, or they change angle just a little bit, they're going to come straight onto the hand. Whereas when we move to Guard of St. George, we've protected the hand, we've got it out the way, and we ensure that we take the parry on the fort where we should take it. And in terms of the angles that this plays, you should be looking at the flat of your blade. So like this, it's not pointing forward like a hanging guard, you're looking at the flat of the blade. It should be slightly above the headline, and in most of the Roworth illustrations, the tip is slightly lower like this, so not like that. And he doesn't actually explain why, but personally I think it's because you want to be taking the energy going off towards the tip and not smashing down towards the hilt. But anyway, there you go. So the hilt is just slightly higher than the tip, and that would be more obvious if I had a straight blade. That is Guard of St. George, and Guard of St. George is always done with a slip. Again, unless there's an exception to the rule, which there is in the tailor lessons, which we'll get onto at some point. But as a rule, when you do your Guard of St. George, we come back into a slip position or shift position, which, you know, Roworth likes to do with most of his parries anyway. So that's Guard of St. George. It's only used against cuts to a vertical downward blow to the head, or where somebody comes in for a leg shot, which we'll also get into in the drill, because it gets the hand out the way, whilst also getting the leg out the way and sets up a nice strike afterwards. So that is also where it's used. So cut against the head, and also when people go to snipe your leg. Now, the hanging guards. There are 2 hanging guards, and there are also half hanging guards. The difference being is that a hanging guard has the hilt above your head. So I'll basically look at you. If I'm in this version of the hanging guard, I'll look at my opponent underneath my hilt, between my blade and my arm. And if I go into a half hanging position, the hand comes down to roughly shoulder height, so I can look over the hilt. And this is obviously designed for parrying cuts that are coming lower. So the 2 hanging guards, there is Prime and Second. From this position, where the hilt is on my right side and the tip crosses over to my left, I can see through the gap between the blade and my arm. This is the Prime hanging guard, and this is the one you're going to use for the drill later on. So this is the most common version of the hanging guard, provides really good protection. And then if I shift the tip forward so it points straight at my opponent, and now there's no obstruction, so I can see my opponent. I'm not looking between the blade and my arm, I'm looking straight line of sight. This is the second hanging guard, and this is less commonly used, although you're going to use that angle in your thrust work, but it does have some part to play in parrying as well. But normally when people say hanging guard, they mean this one, which is the Prime hanging guard. Those guards, Roworth basically says they're defensively fantastic, but are also tiring. I also say that their striking options are not massive. You usually have to use some other feints and things like that to set up attacks from them. So that the responses from them are powerful, for example, and we can also drive in point work, but there's not a huge amount of options to work from the hanging guards, but defensively they are great. So I get the distinct impression from Roworth, he's not suggesting that you stand in them for any length of time, but it is beneficial to use them if you are in doubt of what your opponent's doing. You need a really strong defensive position while you get used to what they're doing, catch your breath, that kind of thing. It just sets you up into a really, really strong position, because from here, you're threatening with a powerful cut, you're defending most of your target zones. So once you're in a hanging guard, pretty much the only concern you've really got is them taking the arm here. There's always an exception to the rule, but it's a really, really strong defensive position to be in. Now, let's move down into the half hanging guards. So inside half hanging, outside half hanging. So going back to the Pringle Green video that I last did, these are the two standard parries that he was using against the cuts coming in from right and left towards the kind of usually the belly and the flank area. So from here, make sure you turn the knuckle bow towards the angle of the attack. So the attack's coming in from my right, I turn the war dial or knuckle bow and turn it this way if it's coming in to my left. And that's also a really important point, is that the knuckle bow, which of course is in line with your true edge, as a general rule, should be directed towards your opponent's blade, because that is how you stay protected. You get the protection of your blade, you get the protection of your guard. So if you're ever wondering where you should be in terms of how your blade should align to your opponents, they don't have to even be engaged. How to align it is point the knuckle bow and the front edge of your sword towards theirs. So if their blade was here, it would point there. If the blade was there, it would point here. And that's the general rule of defense, and that's about covering the line, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the lines and disengages section. So half hanging guard on the inside, half hanging guard on the outside. Now let's move to guards that have the point raised high and the hilt low, which we've already covered in the cut-in section. I talked about the medium guard, which he just doesn't like. And then you've also had inside guard and outside guard also in the cut-in sections. Once again, the tip can be anything from vertical all the way to pointing towards our opponent's face or chest area. And there are reasons to do both. But the important thing with those guards is that you don't expose the elbow. It's really absolutely vital. So this is my outside guard, and you can see the elbow is tucked in with the defense of the hilt. If I bend the elbow and basically stick it out, that's asking for it to be hit. And if people do that to you, that is a fantastic target. So in this system, straighten the arm and keep it out of the way. And if you look to the Angelo posters, you will see a bent arm. But when Angelo in those posters bends the arm, he doesn't bend it outwards, he tucks it in. So this is another way of defending the elbow. It keeps it in line with the hilt and keeps it out of the way and keeps it protected. But Roworth's system tends to use an outstretched arm, however the tip may be. So, outside guard. This will protect my right side, my high right opening. And usually the tip will cross over just to my left side, but it can be a little bit further over. Inside guard is the reverse of it. Again, making sure I don't bend this elbow. It stays pretty straight, okay, however we're doing our inside guard. And then the medium, which Roworth basically doesn't like and doesn't use. Right, what else is there left to look at? Just the what's called the half circle or spadroon guard, and that is this position here. So a lot of people ask in Roworth, is there a reverse of this hanging guard? So this one, is there this one? No, there isn't. There's half circle, which is like that, but a little bit lower, and it's not used for taking head cuts. And if you do that, it tends to really expose the hand in a really nasty way. So that's parrying head cuts with this can be really, really dangerous. You've really got to get the blade in the right place, or, as I said, have a basket hilt or a bowl hilt. That is, incidentally, this parry is used at the time in cavalry swordsmanship. If you look at Gaspard le Marchand, he has a guard called arm protect, and that is because they are on horseback and they need a means to defend this. So yes, they do come up into this position to protect the cuts come in here, and that's a little bit different. And I'm not saying you can't use that on foot, but it's not used in infantry swordsmanship of this period. So half circle is this one here. So when you do your cut 3, remember your cut 3 video, it's just like cut 3, but stops here and is used as a parry for this area here. So if you're an inside guard and people disengage to strike the inside arm, we can just go into half circle guard. It's not a very strong position to be in, far from it. It's quite a weak parry, but it's fast. It's a really quick way to just stop that sniping attack to the arm. So it's not one that I like, but it's one out of necessity, because you've got to get there quickly, is useful. And the other way to protect the arm in that regard is to go into the half hanger. And Roworth does mention in the earlier part of his manual that when people disengage from your outside, so they're there, they disengage from the outside to cut here, then we use half circle, and when they disengage from your inside, we use half circle. Whereas when you go to the tailor lessons, there's no distinction there. It's just there's a cut to the arm, so we do half circle guard. And we're going to get onto that exercise pretty soon. There's your 9 guards. So you've got Guard of St. George, you have Prime Hanging Guard, Second Hanging Guard, Inside Half Hanger, Outside Half Hanger, Medium, which we don't like, Inside Guard, Outside Guard, Half Circle. And if you look to the early, the first edition, Roworth 1798, there are 2 editions of Roworth in 1798, the first and second edition. First edition does also have a few additional inside guards that do add a bit of complication, and when the arm is attacked, rather than go into this, they actually step back with basically a full pass backwards and drop the hilt. It's kind of interesting, it can be useful, but it's left out immediately from second edition onwards, and I think that's just for simplicity's sake. And I tend to work from the 3rd and 4th editions because of their completeness. Okay, how to put this into an exercise? Because you can just stand there and go through those guards, but you have no context, you have no reason to go through them. Now, this is where the tailor solo lesson comes in really, really well. So if you look at the Angelo posters from 1799, there's the 10 lessons, and they start off with a solo drill or solo exercise. And that same solo exercise is also shown in the Roworth 3rd and 4th editions, and it's absolutely excellent for mixing your cuts with your parries and understanding which one is to be used where. Now, each of your parries tends to have multiple uses, so don't think they can only be used for one thing, but the solo lesson does teach you a good way of using them and teaches you how to overall defend the body against all range of attacks. Not everything, but typical stuff. So this exercise, the way it works is we start in the slope swords position. So the sword is on the shoulder and we're in the slip or shift position. Then we move into guard, and in this instance the guard is Prime Hanging Guard. Remember to keep your body weight slightly back on the back foot so that we can shift really, really nicely with our front foot. And then from this position we launch our attacks and our defenses. And this exercise, we make one cut and then we make one parry. And the parry you're making is the parry that will be required for the cut that you've just made. And that is why this is such a great solo exercise. So you can pair up and do this in a pair, because you'll actually have the right order of attack and defense, which is actually really good. But if you're stuck at home and you want to get a good solo exercise in that also trains the right responses, this is a really good solo exercise. We start with the slope swords position. Then we go into guard, which is our Prime guard, Prime Hanging Guard. Make sure you're back weighted so you can slip this nice and easily. We start off by calling where we're going to attack our opponent. So cut at the head will be cut 7, so a downward blow. And then we return with a parry that would parry that strike. So we step back into Guard of St. George. We then cut to the face at the right side, which will be cut 2, because again, this is the opponent's target zones that we're calling out. We return to outside guard that will parry that cut. Then cut to the face on the inside. Return to inside guard. Cut to the flank, outside, so that'll be a cut 6. Return to outside half hanger. Cut to the belly, which will be cut 5. Return to inside guard. Okay, now when we go to then cut the leg, we're going to do a cut 6 down at the leg, and afterwards the response, as I mentioned earlier in the video, is the shift, which is a slip and go into the Guard of St. George. So the leg shift is what defends us. This gets the arm out the way in terms of protecting in case they come up with a sneaky cut to the arm, and primes us for a return blow. And from here we're going to cut the wrist, which will be cut 3, nice and supple. And then we're going to go into the half circle guard, which will defend against that wrist cut. And from here, back to slope swords. And that is the end of the solo or manual exercise. And as I said, that is a fantastic exercise for understanding the mechanics of cuts, slips, parries, and which one you should be using where. Because again, you can use different parries for a range of different defenses, but those ones teach you the typical responses, and they're the ones that you really want to learn at this stage and are well worth practicing at home. So, if we now go into the sloped sword starting position, I'll show you from the front. Go into guard, again, preem hanging guard. Cut at the head, cut 7. Protect the head, guard of St. George. Cut at the face right side, cut 2. Back to outside guard, cut at the face left side, cut 1. Inside guard, cut at the flank, right side, outside half hanger, cut at the flank, inside half hanger, cut at the leg, shift, cut at the wrist, half circle, sloped swords. And that is the exercise, and it is a good conditioning exercise because you're getting in most of what you need to do. You've got guard position, you've got lunge, you've got recovery, you've got your cuts, you've got your parries. So if you threw some thrust work in there, you'd actually have a really good overview to the basics of the system. So that is the manual exercise. You can practice it in lines, you can practice it in pairs, but the beauty of it is you can practice it at home by yourself. And that is really, really useful as a home exercise. So those are the parries. Obviously that's just for defending against cuts. We'll talk about defending against thrusts in another video, although it is using similar strategies. I hope you enjoyed the video. There's a lot more to come. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so.